17 children were waiting for the bus to move, but the dog beneath it seemed to be begging the driver not to turn the key. The yellow school bus idled at the curb outside Havenbrook Elementary, its headlights glowing through the pale Virginia fog, while the smell of wet leaves, cold pavement, and diesel drifted across the quiet morning. Children pressed mittened hands to the windows. A teacher counted names from a clipboard. Somewhere near the front steps, a custodian dragged a trash bin over the concrete. Everything looked ordinary. Almost. Beneath the bus, a German shepherd lay flat against the asphalt, his black and tan coat streaked with mud, his ribs rising quickly beneath the fur. He was not sleeping. His amber eyes were fixed on the engine. Every few seconds, his nose lifted toward the air, then lowered again as if following a scent no one else could detect. "Come on, boy," called Bob Turner, the school district mechanic, tapping a long catch pole against his boot. "You can't stay under there." The dog did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He only shifted closer to the front axle and released a low, uneasy whine. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes heard it from 30 yards away. He had come to repair a broken section of fence behind the playground. Nothing more. He wore a faded marine field jacket over a gray work shirt, and a small blue beaded bracelet circled his left wrist, bright against his weathered skin. He had spent 3 years avoiding school buses. Their yellow paint, folding doors, and flashing red lights carried memories he preferred to keep sealed away. Yet something in the dog's voice stopped him. Daniel set down his toolbox. The driver, Emily Carter, leaned from her window. "We're already late," she said. Bob crouched and reached the pole beneath the chassis. The German shepherd backed away from it, then turned his head sharply toward the engine compartment. Daniel saw the movement. Not fear. Direction. "Hold on," he said. Bob glanced over. "It's just a stray." Daniel walked closer, boots scraping softly over the pavement. The dog's ears moved toward him, but his eyes never left the front of the bus. Daniel knelt several feet away. Up close, he noticed the torn edge of the dog's left ear and the faint outline where a collar had once rested. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" he whispered. The shepherd crawled forward just far enough to touch Daniel's pant leg with his nose. Then he retreated beneath the bus and stared toward the engine again. A thin ribbon of gray smoke curled from behind the front grille. It appeared for barely a second before the fog swallowed it. Daniel's expression changed. He knew that smell. Hot rubber. Melting insulation. The same bitter scent that came before electrical systems failed. "Turn it off," he said. Emily frowned. "The engine." "Now." She reached for the key. The motor coughed once, then went silent. The smoke vanished. Bob looked at Daniel, unimpressed. "Old engine. Cold morning. Happens all the time." Laughter returned inside the bus. A child waved at the dog through the glass. Daniel remained still. The shepherd had not relaxed. His paws pressed hard against the asphalt, and a quiet tremor moved through his body. Then something dark gathered beneath the engine, swelled into a single heavy drop, and struck the pavement inches from his nose. The drop spread across the pavement in a thin black sheen, carrying the sharp smell of fuel beneath the heavier odor of diesel. Daniel lowered 2 fingers toward it without touching. The German shepherd watched his hand, then looked back toward the engine as if waiting for him to understand. "Keep everyone on the bus for 1 minute," Daniel said. His voice was calm, but the calm had weight behind it. Emily Carter rested one hand on the steering wheel. "Is it dangerous?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He stood and studied the front grille, the damp metal, the faint pulse of warmth rising into the cold air. 3 years earlier, he could have identified a failing line or burned wire before most men heard the first warning sound. Back then, machines had been part of his daily life. Engines, transport trucks, generators, field repairs. He had trusted metal because metal usually told the truth. It clicked, leaked, rattled, or smoked. People were harder to read. Memories were harder still. He glanced toward the side of the bus. Yellow paint, black lettering, a row of small faces behind the glass. For an instant, the schoolyard disappeared. He saw rain on a windshield and a blue backpack lying in the road. He heard his daughter Sophie asking him to tighten the bracelet she had made with uneven plastic beads. "Daddy, do not lose it." Daniel drew a slow breath and pressed his thumb against those same blue beads. The fog returned. So did the children's voices. So did the dog beneath the bus. "Daniel?" Emily asked softly. He blinked. "Nobody moves yet." Bob Turner gave a tired sigh. I checked this vehicle yesterday. Belts, fluids, electrical panel. It passed. Then check it again. Bob's jaw tightened. You are here for the fence. Daniel looked at him. And you are here for the bus. The words were quiet. That made them heavier. Bob set the catch pole aside and opened the engine compartment. A breath of gray smoke slipped out, then vanished. He leaned closer, shining a flashlight along the hoses. I do not see a fire. I did not say fire. Daniel stepped beside him. The smell was stronger now, sour and metallic. Somewhere inside the compartment came a faint ticking sound, irregular and delicate, like cooling metal after a long drive. But the engine had been running for less than 10 minutes. The German Shepherd crawled out halfway. His coat was damp along the belly, and mud clung to his paws. He stared at the open compartment, then gave one short bark. A boy near the third window pressed his face to the glass. He was small, with brown hair falling across his forehead and a red winter coat zipped to his chin. "Mister," the boy called through the cracked window. "He keeps looking at the front." Emily turned in her seat. "Noah, stay back from the window." Noah did not move. "He is trying to help." Some of the children laughed, but Noah kept watching the dog with complete seriousness. Daniel noticed that. Children sometimes understood urgency before adults gave it a proper name. Bob reached deeper into the compartment and moved a loose cable aside. The smoke stopped. "There," he said. "Probably moisture burning off." He shut the panel. "We are fine." Emily looked from Bob to Daniel. The schedule was already slipping. Parents would call. The school office would complain. Ordinary pressure returned, pressing everyone toward the easiest decision. Start the bus. Keep moving. Daniel stepped in front of the hood. "Not yet." Bob folded his arms. "You do not give orders here anymore, Sergeant." Daniel's eyes moved to the dog. The shepherd had left the shelter of the chassis and now stood directly in front of the right tire. He planted all four paws on the wet pavement. His body trembled, but he did not move. "Maybe I do not," Daniel said. "But he does." Emily looked down at the ignition. Before she could touch it, the dashboard lights flashed on by themselves. The starter engaged with a sudden mechanical whine, and the engine coughed back to life. The engine surged with a rough metallic shudder, and the German Shepherd sprang sideways just before the front tire rolled half an inch against the wet pavement. Emily pulled the key from the ignition, but the motor kept running. The dashboard lights flickered in a frantic red pattern. Daniel moved at once. "Set the brake." Emily pressed the pedal hard. "It is set." "Then keep your foot there." Bob opened the engine compartment again, and a thicker breath of smoke rolled into the fog. The smell changed. It was no longer only hot insulation. There was something sweeter beneath it, something Daniel remembered from damaged fuel lines and overheated wiring. The dog barked once, sharp and urgent, then circled toward the bus door. He looked up at the children, back at Daniel, then returned to the front wheel. Noah placed both hands against the window. "He is scared for us," he said. This time no one laughed. Daniel raised his voice just enough to carry through the glass. "Emily, open the door." She pulled the lever. Nothing happened. She tried again. The folding panels trembled but stayed shut. "The air system is not responding," she said. Inside, the children fell quiet one by one. Their faces turned toward the adults outside. Mrs. Laura Bennett stood from the first row and began guiding them away from the front steps. "Everyone stay calm," she said. Her tone was steady, but Daniel saw her grip tighten around the seat back. A thin gray layer drifted beneath the dashboard and curled into the aisle. Daniel looked toward the rear emergency exit. "Laura, take them to the back." "What is happening?" "We are getting them off." He crossed the pavement, lifted his toolbox, and pulled out a heavy steel wrench. Bob followed. The rear latch should open from inside. Should is not enough. Daniel reached the back of the bus and struck the external emergency handle housing once, not hard enough to damage the door, only enough to loosen the frozen mechanism. He tried the lever. It shifted slightly. Inside, Laura pushed from the other side. The door opened 3 inches, then caught. Daniel wedged the wrench into the gap and leaned his weight against it. The metal groaned. Cold air rushed inside. "Again," he said. Laura pushed. Daniel pulled. The door finally swung wide. The children began moving toward the rear in a careful line, their backpacks brushing the seats. Daniel stood below the opening and helped the first girl down. Then another. Then a boy in a blue knit cap. The German Shepherd ran along the side of the bus, pacing them, stopping each time a child reached the ground. He was counting in the only way he knew. One child, then another, then another. Emily climbed from the driver's window with Bob's help and hurried around to join them. Smoke gathered behind the windshield now, pressing pale fingers against the glass. Laura handed children down as Daniel called each one clear. 10. A girl with pink gloves. 11. A boy clutching a lunchbox. 12. The dog watched the doorway, ears high. 13. 14. 15. 16. Laura appeared at the rear exit, coughing lightly, her face pale. That is everyone. Daniel looked at Emily. How many were on the route? Emily opened the paper roster with trembling hands. Her eyes moved down the names, then stopped. 17. The German Shepherd spun toward the front of the bus and barked into the smoke. Daniel looked through the open rear door. Between the drifting gray and the rows of empty seats, a faint sound reached him from near the front. One small cough, then silence. Daniel was already moving before Emily finished saying Noah's name. He climbed through the rear emergency door, lowered his shoulders, and entered the aisle where the smoke hung thicker near the ceiling. Noah, he called. Answer me. A weak cough came from the front row. Daniel stepped between the seats, one hand sliding along the metal backs to guide him. The bus was dim now. Dashboard lights blinked through the haze, throwing red reflections across the windows. Somewhere beneath the floor, a wire snapped with a dry little pop. Outside, Laura gathered the children near the brick wall of the school while Emily counted them again, as if the number might somehow change. It did not. 16. The German Shepherd stood at the open rear door, body tense, eyes locked on Daniel. Stay, Daniel told him. The dog lowered his head, but did not step away. Daniel moved deeper into the bus. Each breath tasted of burned plastic and warm metal. He pulled the collar of his shirt over his mouth and crouched below the smoke. Near the front, he finally saw Noah. The boy was bent forward in the second seat, his red coat bright against the gray air. His seat belt had twisted around the buckle, and a narrow section of the overhead rack had fallen across the aisle, blocking the easiest path. Noah looked up when Daniel reached him. His eyes were wet, but he was not crying. The dog knew, he whispered. Yes, Daniel said. He did. Daniel gripped the belt release. It would not move. He pressed again. Nothing. Heat gathered beneath the dashboard, making the air shimmer. Bob's voice carried faintly from outside. Daniel, you need to get out. Daniel ignored him. He pulled a small utility knife from his pocket and began working carefully at the thick strap near Noah's hip. The boy's breathing came fast. Look at me, Daniel said. Do not look at the smoke. Look at me. Noah fixed his eyes on Daniel's face. Are we going to be okay? For one terrible second, Daniel heard Sophie's voice instead. He saw her blue backpack, her small hand in his. The memory came without warning and closed around his chest. The bus seemed to tilt. The sound around him faded until all he could hear was rain from 3 years ago and his own heart beating too hard. His hand stopped. Noah watched him. Mister. Daniel could not answer. Then a soft scraping sound came from behind. The German Shepherd had climbed into the bus. He moved low beneath the smoke, paws careful against the rubber floor. He passed the fallen rack, reached Daniel, and touched his nose to the blue beaded bracelet around Daniel's wrist. The contact was gentle, barely there, but it broke the memory open. Sophie used to press one finger against those beads whenever thunder frightened her. Daniel looked down at the dog. The shepherd's amber eyes held no panic, only purpose. Daniel drew one slow breath. Then another. Not again, he whispered. His hand steadied. He cut through the final threads of the belt, but Noah still could not move. The fallen rack pinned the edge of his backpack against the seat. Daniel tested the metal. It shifted only an inch. I need you to stay low, he told Noah. The boy nodded. The shepherd stepped beside the seat and caught the loose strap of the backpack between his teeth. Daniel understood. He lifted the rack while the dog pulled backward. The metal rose. The backpack slid free. Noah slipped into Daniel's arms. At that same moment, a deep hiss came from beneath the front floor, followed by the sharp scent of fuel warming somewhere it should not. Daniel turned toward the rear exit. The smoke thickened between him and the open door. The shepherd looked back once, then moved into the aisle, waiting for them to follow. Daniel shifted Noah against his chest and followed the shepherd into the aisle. The dog moved slowly, keeping just ahead of them, his body low beneath the smoke. Every few feet, he turned back to make sure they were still there. "Good boy," Daniel said, though the words came out rough. The bus creaked around them. Heat pressed upward through the floor, and a pale orange glow flickered behind the front panel. Daniel kept his eyes on the rear exit. It looked farther away than it had before. Outside, Laura stood near the open door, one hand over her mouth. "I can see them," she called. "Keep coming." Noah clung to Daniel's jacket. "Do not let go." "I will not." The fallen rack narrowed the aisle. Daniel turned sideways and eased Noah past it. The shepherd slipped through first, then stopped on the other side. A sudden burst of sparks flashed near the dashboard. The dog flinched but did not run. He waited. Daniel ducked lower and carried Noah forward. 10 feet, then 8, then 6. Cold air from the open door touched his face. He handed Noah toward Laura, and she pulled the boy safely into her arms. The children cried out when they saw him. Emily dropped to her knees beside them, holding Noah close while Laura checked his breathing. Daniel started to climb down. Then he heard the shepherd bark from inside. One sharp sound. Not behind him. Deeper in the bus. Daniel turned. The dog had gone back toward the front. "No," Daniel said. "Come on, boy." The shepherd stood beside the first row, pawing at the floor near the driver's seat. Smoke rolled around his shoulders. Beneath the panel, a loose section of metal had shifted and trapped one of his hind legs. He pulled once, then stopped. Daniel looked at the exit. Safety was one step away. Bob shouted from the pavement. "Daniel, leave it." The dog looked at him through the haze. There was no fear in those amber eyes. Only the same stubborn trust that had kept him beneath the bus when everyone else wanted to move it. Daniel stepped back inside. "We leave no one behind." He crossed the aisle, dropped beside the shepherd, and gripped the edge of the panel. It was hot enough to sting through his gloves. He lifted. The metal rose half an inch, then slipped. The dog remained still, as if he understood that struggling would make it worse. Daniel reset his hands. His shoulders tightened. He lifted again. This time, the shepherd pulled his leg free. A wash of warmer air pushed through the bus. Daniel wrapped one arm beneath the dog's chest and another under his body. The shepherd was lighter than he should have been. Daniel carried him toward the rear as the windows filled with gray. Laura reached for the dog first, guiding him down while Bob caught his weight. Daniel climbed out after them and stumbled onto the pavement. Behind him, the engine compartment gave a heavy thump, and a bright flare rose beneath the hood. No one screamed. The children simply moved closer together. Daniel knelt beside the shepherd. The dog lay still, his chest barely moving. "Come on," Daniel whispered. Emily placed 2 fingers near the dog's throat, then looked at Daniel with frightened eyes. "I cannot feel it." The schoolyard seemed to fall silent. Daniel put both hands over the shepherd's chest and began pressing with careful, steady rhythm. The blue beads on his wrist tapped against his dog tag. Click, press, click, press. "You brought him back," Daniel said, looking toward Noah. "Now come back yourself." Nothing happened. Then, beneath Daniel's hands, the shepherd's chest gave one small rise. The shepherd drew in a thin, uneven breath, and Daniel froze with both hands resting over the dog's chest. For 1 second, no one moved. Then the dog coughed softly and turned his head toward the sound of the children. The schoolyard released its breath with him. Noah stepped forward from Emily's arms, his red coat still carrying the smell of smoke. "He came back," he whispered. Daniel nodded, but his eyes stayed on the dog. "Yes," he said. "He did." Sirens rose in the distance, growing louder through the fog. Bob moved the children farther from the bus, while Laura kept them together near the school wall. The bright flare beneath the hood had faded to a low glow, and the engine now gave only occasional clicks, small mechanical sounds against the morning silence. Daniel slipped off his field jacket and laid it over the shepherd. The dog's coat was warm in some places and cold in others. His breathing remained shallow, but steady enough to count. A county fire crew arrived first, followed by an ambulance and an animal control vehicle. Men in reflective coats moved quickly around the bus, but Daniel barely noticed them. He kept one hand against the dog's side, feeling each breath return. A paramedic knelt beside him. "Sir, we need to check you." "Check the boy first." "The boy is being evaluated." Daniel looked toward Noah. The child sat on the curb wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, answering questions with quiet nods. Emily remained beside him. Then checked the dog. The paramedic glanced toward the animal control officer. They are bringing oxygen. Daniel finally looked down at his own hands. The gloves were dark with soot. A small burn marked the edge of one wrist, just below Sophie's bracelet. He felt no pain yet, only the strange emptiness that often came after danger passed, the kind that made a man realize his body had been moving faster than his grief. The shepherd opened his eyes. Amber, clouded with exhaustion, but awake. He looked at Daniel first, then at Noah. His tail moved once beneath the jacket, barely an inch. It was enough. Noah saw it and smiled. The expression was small, uncertain, but it changed the whole morning. The animal control officer approached with a portable oxygen mask designed for dogs. She was a middle-aged woman named Karen Wells, with kind eyes and a calm voice. "Let us help him breathe easier." Daniel shifted back, but did not leave. Karen placed the mask gently over the shepherd's muzzle. The dog resisted for half a second, then relaxed when Daniel touched the torn edge of his left ear. "Easy," Daniel murmured. "You finished the mission." The words struck him harder than he expected. He had said something similar to Sophie once after she completed a school project, proud and laughing at the kitchen table. The memory came with warmth this time, not only pain. Daniel lowered his head. The blue beads trembled against his wrist. For 3 years, he had believed surviving meant keeping every door closed. No school buses, no playgrounds, no children's voices, no yellow paint. He had mistaken distance for healing. But that morning, a nameless dog had crawled beneath the very thing Daniel feared most and refused to leave until everyone was safe. The shepherd had not avoided the danger. He had listened to it. Daniel looked toward the bus, now surrounded by mist and emergency lights. Then he looked at the children gathered together, all 17 of them. Alive, present, waiting. Noah rose from the curb and walked over slowly. He crouched beside the dog, careful not to touch the oxygen mask. "Does he have a name?" Daniel looked at the worn line around the shepherd's neck where a collar had once been. "Not one we know yet." Noah placed his small hand near the dog's paw. "Then we should find out." The shepherd opened his eyes again and rested his paw over Noah's fingers. By noon, the fog had lifted from Havenbrook, leaving the schoolyard bright and strangely clean beneath a pale blue sky. The bus stood behind a line of orange safety cones, silent now, its windows open to the cold air. Investigators moved around it with clipboards and flashlights, tracing the failure from the damaged wiring to a narrow fuel line softened by heat. Daniel watched from the parking lot only long enough to hear the words no one wanted to say aloud. Another few minutes on the road, and the outcome could have been very different. He turned away before the sentence was finished. The German Shepherd had already been taken to Cedar Ridge Veterinary Clinic, a small brick building 3 miles from the school. Daniel followed in his pickup truck with Noah and Emily behind him in her car. At the clinic, the smell of antiseptic and clean cotton filled the waiting room. A wall clock ticked above a row of empty chairs. Daniel sat with his elbows on his knees, Sophie's bracelet resting against his wrist. Noah sat beside him, still wrapped in the silver blanket even though the room was warm. Neither spoke. After nearly 40 minutes, Dr. Helen Price stepped through the swinging door. She was in her early 50s, with silver threaded through her dark hair and the steady expression of someone practiced at carrying both hope and hard news. "He is stable," she said. Noah stood so quickly the blanket fell from his shoulders. "Can we see him?" For a minute. The shepherd lay on a padded table in the recovery room, an oxygen line near his muzzle and a soft bandage around his hind leg. His coat had been cleaned enough to reveal the deep sable pattern beneath the mud. Daniel approached slowly. The dog opened his eyes and lifted his head an inch. "Easy," Daniel said. "You have done enough for one day." Dr. Price ran a scanner along the dog's shoulders. It gave no sound. "No microchip," she said. "But we found something else." She reached beneath the thick fur around his neck and carefully drew out a narrow strip of cracked leather that had been hidden against the skin. A small metal plate hung from it, darkened by age. Helen wiped it with gauze. Letters appeared one by one. "Ranger." Beneath the name was a second line. "Havenbrook School Safety Program." Noah looked at Daniel. He belonged here. Daniel did not answer. His chest had gone tight again, but not from smoke. Helen placed the tag in his palm. The metal was cold and worn smooth at the edges. The program closed several years ago, she said. You might ask the district office. Someone there may remember him. Daniel studied the engraving. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a door opened. Rachel had once mentioned volunteering with a safety program at Sophie's school. He remembered only fragments. Saturday mornings. Training demonstrations. A dog she said was too smart for his own good. Daniel had been away for much of that year, then buried beneath the silence that followed the accident. He looked at Ranger. Who trained you? The dog's ears shifted toward his voice. That afternoon, the district secretary brought an old storage box from the administration building. Inside were faded brochures, training logs, and photographs curled at the corners. Noah sat on the floor while Daniel turned each page. Then one picture stopped him. Rachel stood beside a yellow school bus, smiling into the sun. Sophie was in front of her, both arms wrapped around a younger ranger's neck. Around the dog's collar hung the same metal tag, now resting in Daniel's hand. On the back, written in Rachel's blue ink, were 6 words. He always knows when something is wrong. Daniel read the words twice. Then a third time, slower, as if Rachel's handwriting might disappear if he looked away. He always knows when something is wrong. The clinic room seemed to narrow around him. The soft hum of the oxygen machine, the quiet ticking of the wall clock, Noah shifting beside him. All of it faded beneath the weight of 6 familiar words. He turned the photograph over again. Rachel's smile was exactly as he remembered it before grief changed every room in their house. Sophie stood in front of her with one hand tangled in Ranger's fur and the other lifted toward the camera, blue beads bright around her wrist. Daniel looked down at his own bracelet. Same color, same uneven pattern. He had worn it through deployments, funerals, sleepless nights, and 3 years of refusing to step near a yellow bus. He had never known Ranger was part of that memory. Dr. Price stood quietly by the table. The records say your wife helped train him, she said. Smoke alerts, evacuation drills, finding children who froze or hid during emergencies. He worked here for almost 2 years. Daniel glanced toward Ranger. The shepherd rested with his head on the folded blanket, eyes half open. What happened after the program closed? The district secretary searched through the box. The trainer who managed the dogs passed away. Ranger was transferred to a private handler, then another. After that, the records stop. So he came back, Noah said. No one corrected him. The thought settled over the room with the quiet certainty of prayer. Ranger had crossed streets, cold mornings, and whatever lonely miles had come before, only to return to the place where his purpose had first been given a name. Daniel moved closer to the table. Ranger lifted his muzzle and pressed it weakly against Daniel's palm. The old tag rested between them. You remembered, Daniel whispered. The shepherd closed his eyes. Over the next several days, Havenbrook talked about little else. Parents brought cards to the clinic. Children drew pictures of Ranger standing beside a yellow bus with a red cape tied around his neck. Bob Turner visited twice, each time carrying a new tool for the school's emergency kit and saying very little. Emily requested a full inspection of every bus in the district. Laura organized a safety review with the teachers. No one called Daniel an alarmist again. The official report confirmed that a damaged electrical connection had overheated near the fuel line. The failure had been difficult to see from a routine inspection and easy to dismiss in the cold morning fog. Ranger had caught the scent before anyone else. Daniel read the report at home that night, seated at the same kitchen table where Sophie once built bracelets from plastic beads. The house had been silent for years. Now Ranger's borrowed blanket lay near the back door, waiting for him to come home from the clinic. Daniel had not planned that. He had only brought it because Dr. Price said familiar scents could help. Yet the empty corner no longer felt empty. On the 5th morning, Ranger stood for the first time. His bandaged leg trembled, but he remained upright. Daniel crouched several feet away, holding the old collar. No orders, he said. You decide. Ranger took one step, then another. He crossed the small recovery room and stopped in front of Daniel. Noah, watching from the doorway, covered his mouth with both hands. Daniel fastened the collar gently around Ranger's neck. The metal tag settled against his chest with a soft click. Rachel's handwriting was still in Daniel's pocket. Sophie's beads were still on his wrist. For the first time, those memories did not pull him backward. They seemed to point somewhere ahead. 3 months later, winter had loosened its grip on Havenbrook. The maples along the school road showed the first pale green buds, and morning sunlight stretched across the parking lot in long golden bands. Daniel stood beside the bus lane with Ranger at his left knee. The shepherd's hind leg had healed, though he still favored it after long walks. His coat was clean now, black and tan bright beneath the sun, and his old metal tag rested against a new leather collar. Fastened beside it was one small blue bead from Sophie's bracelet. Daniel had removed it carefully the night before, not to let go of her, to carry her forward. The district had restarted the school safety program under a new name. Ranger would inspect every bus before departure, while Daniel trained drivers and staff to recognize the warning signs machines often gave before failure. Bob had installed updated emergency tools in every vehicle. Emily had memorized every evacuation procedure. Laura practiced calm exits with the children until no one treated safety like a game. And Noah arrived early each morning, standing by the curb in his red coat, waiting for Ranger. "Ready?" Daniel asked. Ranger looked up, ears alert. Daniel gave a small nod. The shepherd began his walk around the first bus, nose moving along the tires, wheel wells, and engine grill. He paused once near the front, and the entire yard seemed to hold still. Then he continued. "No smoke. No fuel. No danger." Noah smiled from the steps. "All clear." Ranger sat beside Daniel and gave one short bark. The children cheered, not loudly, but warmly, the way people greet someone who has already proven he does not need applause. Daniel opened the bus door and stood back as they climbed aboard. He no longer turned away from the yellow paint. He no longer felt the road vanish beneath him when the folding doors closed. The memories remained, but they had changed shape. Rachel's smile lived in the old photograph now framed near his kitchen window. Sophie's laughter returned sometimes when Ranger chased fallen leaves across the yard. Grief had not disappeared. It had simply stopped being the only thing waiting for him at home. Noah was the last child to board. Before stepping inside, he crouched and wrapped both arms around Ranger's neck. "You are coming back tomorrow, right?" Daniel answered for him. "Every morning." Noah looked up. "Both of you." Daniel rested one hand on Ranger's shoulder. "Both of us." The boy nodded and climbed aboard. Emily closed the door. The engine started with a steady, familiar hum. Ranger watched the grill for several seconds, then relaxed. The bus pulled away from the curb, carrying 17 children toward home. Daniel remained beside the road until it disappeared beyond the trees. A breeze moved through the schoolyard, stirring the flag above the entrance and making the blue bead on Ranger's collar tap softly against his tag. Daniel looked down. "She would have liked you," he said. Ranger leaned against his leg. There was no miracle large enough to return what had been lost. No act of courage could erase an empty chair or restore an old voice exactly as it had been. But mercy rarely arrived by restoring the past. Sometimes it came quietly, on four paws, carrying a forgotten name back to the place where it still mattered. Ranger had not given Daniel his family back. He had given him a reason to keep protecting the family still here. Daniel turned toward the school. Ranger walked beside him. And for the first time in 3 years, the sound of children laughing did not feel like something he had lost. It felt like something worth staying for.